There's a number of absolutely. Okay, yeah, I will. No, let me just finish real quick and I'll it was up there and it was projecting the side.
Okay, good afternoon. We're about to start the TNC working group conference call and meeting. So if you are here for that, you can take a seat, maybe go up front. And if you're not, maybe you can take your conversation to the lobby. Do we know if we have anybody on the conference call? Can you tell that? Okay. Okay. So thank you for holding on. We got pushed back a little bit. Everybody was a little bit longer winded than we expected, I think, in the morning. So thank you for staying with us for this TNC working group. We're fortunate today. We're fortunate today to have with us to have Edward Escobar here with us. As the founder of the Alliance for Independent Workers and its hashtag Drivers Unite International campaign to unite all drivers from all transport sectors, Mr. Escobar provides advocacy and lobbying for drivers and gig economy workers worldwide. In the U.S., the gig economy represents approximately a third of all workers. As this worker segment continues its rapid growth, it's projected to increase to over 40% within a few years, and by 2027, representing a whopping 50% of the U.S. workforce. It's critically important that administrative and legislative advancements keep pace and begin to anticipate and plan ahead for future of mobility and the accompanying needs of its workers. Gig workers rely on fair treatment, which up until recently has been the unchecked responsibility of corporations and lawmakers. Mr. Escobar saw that gap and realized the significance of early intervention. It was and is, in his experience, that it's far easier to correctly align an organization while the growth is occurring than to fix damage caused by inaction. His organization, the Alliance for Independent Workers, is the clear and dominant voice representing this overlooked and underappreciated worker class, consisting predominantly of immigrants, low-income, minorities, seniors, the disabled, veterans, single moms, students, and those with criminal records that are even further marginalized. Mr. Escobar implemented the first and largest united voice of drivers in the U.S. media in 2016's Day of Disruption collaboration with the SEIU FF15-340 locations with 20 major airports. A champion of worker rights, his focus early on was to address the core problems of misclassification of employment, knowing full well it would resolve the symptoms of exploitation of the gig workforce, leading eventually to the recent and successful passing of California's AB 5 legislation. So here to give us an update on AB 5 from California, what it means, what the likely ramifications, consequences, positive and negative will be, is Mr. Escobar. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dozens of people were arrested today in protests across the nation calling for a $15 per hour minimum wage. Workers from fast food restaurants, daycares, and airports walked off the job today in cities from New York to San Francisco. ABC 7 News reporter Amy Hollyfield has been following the story and has a look at what happened during protests in Oakland and at San Francisco International Airport. Protesters shut down the intersection of 98th Avenue and International Boulevard in Oakland this morning to demand a higher minimum wage. They blocked the street for about an hour before police moved in and made some arrests. Organizers were pleased with the turnout.
Well, it sends a real strong message that, status quo is not acceptable, and that we definitely need to consider the workers and their rights and their opportunity and ability to earn a sustainable living.
This was one of several demonstrations that took place across the country today. Here's a look at the rally that happened in Chicago. This nationwide effort is called Fight for 15, meaning they want the minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. They staged their protests outside of McDonald's restaurants and airports, highlighting fast food workers, baggage handlers, and ticket agents as examples of who they are fighting for. Uber drivers also participated here in the Bay Area.
We actually make a lot less than minimum wage workers. So we're here basically to say, we cannot allow corporate America to put profits before people.
Amy Hollyfield, ABC 7 News.
Alrighty. So today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, California's AB 5 legislation, the future of mobility work. Without the drivers, you can't take care of the riders. So it's a very important component. Thanks for seeking this out here, because I know it's at the end of this conference, and so we appreciate your commitment here, because it is very significant to know about what's going on in the trenches, to hear from a different perspective. Earlier you heard from folks that are parts of the push for unionization. Our focus really is for unifying, because without unifying, you can't have a union. Without unifying, you can't have any significant impact on the industry across the board and across the globe. So first, I want to thank Matt Dowse for the inclusion of the driver's voice in addressing the challenges that are facing the transport workers. It is very significant. Initially, he had invited us, and last year, in our participation, it was the first time ever that we had a panel discussion on the driver's condition, which is entirely significant. As mentioned, the Alliance for Independent Workers and Drivers Unite movement is uniting all drivers across all transport sectors. It is significant that we are connected with the folks that are in the trenches. I myself, a 5.5-year full-time driver, I've driven for 11 different companies. It makes a difference when you're there, not just making observations or speculations, because you're doing a great disservice when you're doing things not as in-depth as possible. So even you'll notice that there's a lot of articles that you read about that the reporters don't even get it right. And it's quite interesting, and to be honest, dereliction of duty, I would say, because there is a requirement for due diligence to report the facts and not just repeat. That's a misrepresentation. And that is damaging because the movement is being moved, and we are the tip of the spear, and we are the new alternative labor movement. Very grassroots is what we're talking about. So, this is action that we had in early 2016 at Uber's headquarters. It's a world headquarters in San Francisco, where we are based out of. Our reach goes beyond the state of California, and we're nationally, internationally, with the drivers here in Canada as well. We have our global collaboration in the UK, as well as Australia, and we are hitting the major markets where Uber is, as well as Sao Paulo, Brazil. They are manifesting some demonstrations there and following our directions. So we're facilitating these folks to be more effective with talking points that are significant. So, a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt: "No business which depends for existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country." Very significant. As you see the success of the California Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez being the author of the Assembly Bill 5, AB 5, and if you want more information, of course, always check out hashtag AB5 or hashtag yes on AB5, and it's very informative. So what is AB5 and why was it necessary? Well, drivers have been driven into poverty, despair, and suicide. That's how significant it is when you see 9+ suicides in New York alone, plus San Francisco. You have taxi drivers that have been impacted significantly. They're working more and more and making less and less. That is creating workers' exhaustion. And a lot of folks, they tend to focus on, wow, Uber and Lyft, a great service, they're taking a lot of drunk drivers off the road, but they're replacing them with drivers that are driving under workers' exhaustion. Even the folks that say, oh, I do this as a part-time gig. Well, these people, they may have full-time jobs as well. So they're actually working maybe double full-time in doing this. So workers' exhaustion is worse than driving drunk. So you're replacing one problem with another. And a lot of folks are not addressing that. But that is very significant. So how will AB5 impact the workers? As was mentioned earlier, this is not just about drivers. This is an issue impacting all 1099 workers, independent contractors, casual workers, informal workers, patchwork workers, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. Independent contractors, 1099 workers. And it does impact in terms of the rights that we have. And to clarify, this AB5 does not create employees. What it does is it specifically states what a real independent contractor is. So the companies, they either fit or they must quit this bad behavior. And that's what this is basically in a nutshell. So of the organizations that have been out there, we've been in the trenches 4.5 years now. These other latecomers to the game have been focusing on unionizing, and you'll hear a lot of their focus about strike, about unfair pay. Well, from the get-go, we always knew that if you address the core problem, then the symptoms then become resolved. Core problem was always from the get-go, misclassification of employment, because then that empowers the worker to use the existing regulatory agencies that are in place. So the laws were already there. This is just bringing greater clarity to the table so that you have corporations like the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world that were using and abusing and the exploitation. It's a fraudulent exploitation of the workforce. In the meantime, they're making billions and billions of dollars and crying poverty all the way. But you'll see that these folks, their co-founders, one purchased a mansion, Beverly Hills, Garrett Camp, $72 million. Travis Kalanick, former CEO, a penthouse in New York City, $36 million. I'm not feeling their pain. So that's something that when you see what's happening in the trenches with drivers being driven to poverty, despair, and suicide, it's real, and the struggle is very real, and we're seeing it all the time, and it's worsening. So From this slide here, you see 87% of gig economy workers. As mentioned earlier, that's a third of the workforce. 87%, that does not adequately reflect actually the desire of most drivers. When you speak to them from the trenches, they'll tell you. You mentioned union, it's like a 4-letter word, as the gentleman said earlier today. They want to be real independent contractors. And most corporations, they have the bulk of their workers as employees. And then they have a smaller component that are independent contractors. So it is quite feasible that Uber and Lyft can actually pivot their business model to account for independent contractors. And they could do that by being simply a qualified lead generation service, building service, marketing service. But they have to pivot their business model. Do they want to do that? No. So they're like Chicken Little crying that the sky is falling to try to keep things status quo as much as possible. Their suggestion, of course, well, I'll get into that later. But taking a look at the breakdown here, you'll see the employee misclassification issues. This is what can happen. In its present business model, though, let's be clear, Uber and Lyft, the drivers would be employees. Why is that? It's because the amount of control mechanisms. Drivers are not setting their own rates, terms, and conditions. Plumbers, electricians, real independent contractors. Are they being subjected to those types of control mechanisms? No, it's not happening. So that's primarily the difference. So relinquish the control mechanisms, let the drivers set their own rates, terms, and conditions, then we're talking more on par with what a real independent contractor can be. At the actions that were at the Sacramento State Capitol, you saw all the signage that was there from Mobile Workers Alliance, the MWA out of Southern California. Well, that's SEIU 721 behind that. Gig Workers Rising in San Francisco, in our backyard. That's SEIU and Teamsters. It's Working Partnerships USA, Partnerships for Working Families USA. Look it up. It's there. Who's paying the bills? So, we are not monetized. We are not trying to make a success or a monetary venture off the backs of drivers that are already being squeezed into poverty, despair, and suicide, because that's just not a principled thing to do. And being a driver, I understand where they're coming from. So the basis of AB 5, where did that start? Off of the Dynamics ruling. That was the California unanimous Supreme Court ruling that occurred in April of 2018. But here's the problem, people. Uber and Lyft, well, primarily like Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber, was saying, oh, that doesn't apply to us, because we're not Dynamics. So what they were looking at is they needed to be specifically called out. So early part of last year, we were already having meetings with Lorena Gonzalez's office and other legislators as well. And we had been pushing this whole misclassification of employment from the get-go, because we always knew core problems address symptoms. So instead of running around trying to put out these fires and putting bandages on things and create the illusion of busy work, let's go to the jugular, core problem. Resolve it there, everything else is taken care of by default. So, as you folks may have heard in the media, it was successfully passed last week, signed by the governor. But let's take a look at what this breakdown is. You'll see one of the points there, back pay. 4 years that is going back in terms of back pay. So there's going to be a windfall for a number of drivers that have been used and abused and kicked to the curb. And you'll notice also, too, in the media, a number of lawsuits are coming out on the heels of that, and rightfully so. Employee versus independent contractor, factors not considered. the independent contractor agreement, business license, workers incorporated, timing, and mode of pay. Here's the ABC test in a nutshell. It looks rather elementary, right? So it's basically saying if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. That's it in a nutshell. They gave an example of like a bakery hiring a plumber, and that is not in the normal course of the bakery's business to fix and to repair plumbing. So that's the clear distinction. But really, as I said earlier, a real independent contractor sets its own rates and terms and conditions. And that's why, as I was alluding to earlier, in Sacramento, when we were there pushing as the tip of the spear, we were the only group that was calling for real independence for independent contractors. Everyone else was all about pushing drivers into the category of becoming employees. Why is that, you have to ask yourself? Because it becomes easier to unionize and create membership dues. So, but this is not about the unionization. This is about, saving the workforce from this massive exploitation. And that's where the focus needs to be. But it's being distracted somewhat by these gatekeepers who claim to be the saviors, but the unions are not the saviors. I tell the drivers, we got to save ourselves. Stop waiting for someone to charge in on a white horse and save the day. It's not going to happen. Don't hold your breath. We need to step up. As I say to drivers, step up or be stepped on. That's what's happening. And these folks, they're soft targets. As I mentioned, immigrants, low income, minority. You know the laundry list. These folks are abused and kicked to the curb. And in some respects, it's because of the cultural exposure they've had in other countries. They know to fly under the radar, they could be disappeared. So they bring that to here, and they stay silent. And they keep taking the kicks and the hits. They say, yes, I'll take the hit, but just please don't deactivate me. May I have another? That's how bad it is. And let me clarify too, because a lot of people, their initial response is, well, if you don't like it, then get another job. How easy for some folks, very entitled, for them to say that. When we're talking about a category of the workforce that's most often been abused. We're saying, stick it out, let's stand up, and let's make a difference together. Because solidarity and collaborations, we find that we are getting great results as demonstrated by AB5, and that's in California. And as they say, as goes California, thus goes the rest of the nation. And you've already heard what New York has stated. They want to be better than California, and we welcome that. We truly do. Because of all drivers that was mentioned earlier, yes, New York City, I take my hat off to them. These folks are the true professionals when it comes to driving. These other areas in California, I'm native California, San Francisco. These guys are like wearing shorts, flip-flops, they roll out of bed, hey, I want to drive. Where's the commitment? There's no professionalism. So we're pushing for standards to be in place. It should be on par with taxi in terms of safety, for the vehicle inspections, and also the vetting of the individuals, the drivers that are coming in. These bogus background checks, come on. It's not acceptable. Checkers that they're using. Where are full fingerprint with US DOJ background checks? When they have a Somalian warlord accused of genocide getting on the platform, and all you had to do was perform a simple Google search on his name, and it popped up, come on. And that was all over the news. So ABC test, you see once again, it's now the standard to determine independent contractors. So what's going to happen is the assumption is, and the onus is placed upon the employer/contractor. It is assumed that your workers are employees until you prove otherwise. You see, whereas prior the onus was on the individual worker, which, as you know, many of those folks don't know what their rights are or how to assert them. So now this is great in terms of workers' rights and moving in the right direction. As mentioned earlier, Governor Newsom did sign. You see him in the center, and then Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman from San Diego, there on his side. Major victory. We were really concerned, actually, about what was going to go down with Newsom, because, in case you don't know, Newsom was mayor of San Francisco when the tech titans of Silicon Valley came into the Hollywood of tech of San Francisco. So he basically opened the doors, and he was very tech-friendly. Because he was looking to get their support. He's got political ambitions. So we were pushing against him from early on, reminding him, don't sell out the drivers, vote yes on AB 5, let's push this through. He has the support of labor as well. So we were working with California Labor Federation. Caitlin Vega, their legislative director, did an excellent job in partnership and collaboration with Lorena Gonzalez to get this all pushed through successfully. What's going to happen now? Well, Uber Chief Legal Officer Tony West, he vows to continue the fight against AB 5. They are throwing in $30 million, and they're saying they're willing to go even more in terms of throwing into the pot. So they've got, I'd say, a war chest of over $100 million. Interesting. They'll fight the fight for that, to deny that the usual core of their business is drivers. They're denying that. So they're trying to fall back on their argument of the past, that they're not a transportation company and they're not 100% reliant on the driver. Bullshit. Anyhow, it's one of those things that they're going to fight tooth and nail and realize why they're doing this, because every month that they're able to deter and delay this legislation from impacting them, they're able to make billions and billions of dollars. So don't believe their cry of poverty. That's this whole victimization approach, so that they can claim that we'd love to help our drivers, but we don't have the money. It's all a shell game, folks. It's all trickery, it's smoke and mirrors. JFK, those who would destroy or further limit the rights of organized labor, those who would cripple collective bargaining or prevent organization of the unorganized, do a disservice to the cause of democracy. Very significant. Our focus is we want it to be truly organized labor, not disorganized, corporatized labor, making deals, having meetings, excluding real drivers in the mix, which is what's happened. There's another area that you folks may have heard of. It's a great concept. It's called portable benefits. But when you have folks like David Roth, who's the co-founder of Fight for 15, which is the most successful labor movement in U.S. history, when he's having meetings with Uber behind the scenes, and David Roth, he is the head guy for Washington State, also working in Washington. They're having meetings discussing portable benefits. Well, ladies and gentlemen, anything that's driven by corporate or the organized labor and not including the worker is going to benefit them first and foremost, and that's not acceptable. So our call is a global AB5 style push. And so you'll see that. And why is that significant? Because the maxims of the court of fair, just, and equitable are not being applied. And so they're trying to do a sideways dance, and they're trying to get away with what they can wherever they can. So it's significant that we all pull together in solidarity. In collaborative efforts, we have strength in numbers. In the U.S., we have many groups in social media platforms that number easily into the hundreds of thousands. This is not just one market area like Los Angeles or New York City. So moving mobility. What's the future of work for these workers in mobility and gig work? In driving, well, we have to look at automation, which was touched on earlier. AB 5, rights of workers when it comes to driving professions, it's just not going to matter when you have the technology of AI automation self-driving basically decimating the driver's population. You saw and you've heard about the suicides. Get ready, folks, because that's just the beginning of everything to come. And that's exactly why we've extended, as always was, the vision was to unite all drivers across all transport sectors. It's not just the ride-hail, the Uber, Lyft, the delivery drivers, the DoorDash, the Postmates. No, this goes beyond taxi, the limo livery, black car, also EMT, paratransit, paramedics, MTA bus drivers, as well as truck drivers. Truck drivers is 3+ million. Plus, look at Uber, Lyft, that's 3+ million. When you start adding the numbers, folks, it's huge. It's huge. And they all have major skin in the game. As you can see, the effects of the Uberization model that is global in nature, we must address this because it is, like I said, a virus that is spreading globally. Do what you can with what you have where you are. Theodore Roosevelt stated that. So as you'll see there, the automation, significant, what games, the gamification, how drivers are being played in the ride-hail industry. Also, the truckers are experiencing the same things. The same things. It's very significant because if you look at, there was a quote from Stephen Hawking. He stated that the demise of humanity would come from where? Specifically stated technology. Going further, said that the paradigm shift, game-changing moment would be self-driving when that's introduced. We're already there, people. So this behavior of ignorant denial and avoidance is not the solution. We have to start the dialogue and the narrative now so that we can control the rollout of technology. We're not talking about the going back to the horse and buggy days of saying, them damn automobiles, they will never be successful. It's just a passing fad. No, this is here. It's already. I'm in the Hollywood of tech. We have these tech titans. We have their workers, their coders, their programmers in our vehicles. And our vehicles are like confessional booths, if you will. So they start just vomiting all this information about what's going on. We hear all the inside scoop. So that is powerful to have access to that kind of information because that tells you where everything's headed. So we can anticipate and adjust and address the issues before they become critical. Some of you may have heard about the action that happened on the 17th of this month. There was more than 1,000 vehicles, black car, and we started that action. The Drivers Unite action started, and we invited the IDG to participate. And the collaborative effort was successful because they brought the troops. They brought significant numbers of troops, and we are very grateful to that. But that's the way it should be because we're all drivers, we're all workers, we're all human beings, and we need to stand together because this is a societal issue. So it's something significant. You'll see in here the Blasio and TLC. Well, this cruising cab is not the answer. It should be a driver's cab. Earlier, they had discussed the cruising cab, but it's not addressing the congestion issues, people. This congestion pricing tax is not going to provide the solution. If you cap the drivers, because the driver is one car, If you cap the vehicles, that vehicle can be rolled 24/7 with several drivers. And it also creates a predatory leasing opportunity for these leasing companies. This whole vehicle cap that they did in New York, very dysfunctional. Even the Taxi Limo News report, they stated that this is the worst thing that they could have done. Because, you see, they already understood that this was coming down the pipeline. They onboarded, they had, before the deadline for the application, they had already gotten the vehicles already lined up prior to leasing companies. So what's happened is that they're onboarding during that cap period, supposedly, more vehicles during that cap period than any time prior. So it's very dysfunctional, and it alludes to the fact, or gives the impression that, oh, so you see, that didn't work. We shouldn't have done that. But the real deal is one driver, one car. No new drivers, people. No new drivers. Take care of the existing base of drivers. You'll address the oversaturation issues. You'll address everything else. That's a core problem. See, Uber and Lyft and the other app-based companies, their goal is all about big data metrics. Okay? It's how many riders they have, how many drivers they have, how many rides they'll provide. It doesn't matter that those rides were provided at a loss, because the driver is bearing most of that pain. It's the driver that's taking that, because they are being squeezed and squeezed. That's why high churn rate. There's very poor driver retention. As soon as they blow through the bonuses, they see that it doesn't make dollars or cents to continue driving. And it's a huge cause for, relationships being damaged and divorces. It's horrendous, but it spirals out of control. So, in closing, I'd like to state, take care of the drivers and they will take care of the riders. And I want to thank Matt Dawes for, once again, in the inclusion of the driver's narrative in this. But most of all, I want to thank all of you folks. Because without you folks knowing what's going on, and I had this conversation with someone last night, because they did mention, and I heard the other day, one of the regulators from Michigan stating that, they'd love to do more, but their hands are tied, and they're all about applying policy that's already in place. But as I stated to her, I said, look, I understand that. However, we don't want to bypass you guys and negate your significant contribution. We want everyone to know every step of the way, because this all moving together, we can find solutions together. So, si se puede, yes we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Very informative. I have one quick question, and then I'm going to open it up if anybody else has another question, keeping in mind that we are running behind and we're going to get kicked out of the street in Calgary. So, I will start by saying this. I think maybe we would have to, or would like to, have an update, maybe say January or February, if you're available, Edward, to let us know how AB 5 has been rolled out, what the pushback has been, what the accomplishments have been, and thinking specifically of drivers and TNC, because that's what this committee is for. So you mentioned in your presentation that this is all about misclassification, and that there is a fairly simple mechanism to properly classify Uber drivers or TNC drivers as 1099 legitimate independent contractors. How would that work? What would be the mechanism for that?
Well, I didn't say simple, so.
Okay.
Well, it's, like I said, it's two-pronged, because in the real world, there's categories that exist for independent contractors and for employees, and we don't want, as one of the solutions that's being offered by Uber, is they want to create this hybrid third category that would enable them to continue status quo. But that, even the California Building Trades and SEIU 32BJ, may rest in peace, Hector Figueroa was pushing that the unions cannot undermine nor get in bed with that type of approach. There's two classifications there for a reason, and they would undermine all of the other contracts that have been fought for by the unions, as well as the labor rights that people fought and died for. So we have to keep them in check. They are not special just because they have a special communication device that creates greater convenience. They still have to be subjected to the same labor laws. They can't violate the wage and hour laws that are there that need to be enforced. AB 5 just created greater clarity so that they can't say it's gray, it's in this nebulous state and exploit that. So there's another category already exists too. It's called statutory non-employee. A lot of real estate agents have that. So there's already categories that exist. But they're trying to say that what's on the books right now, well, that's antiquated. You guys are just old school. We're new school. So we know what's going on. It's kind of like the way that Zuckerberg was talking to the regulatory agencies and the politicians. He was talking down his nose at them. And as if they are the all-knowing, the almighty Oz. And that's just not how it is. The Oracle of Delphi, no, they can't use that play. Because the consequences are catching up with them. We're starting to see how their game is. They're gamifying the whole process, and it's just to clarify, they did not anticipate workers' rights to get the jump that it did. Their whole game plan, if you look at what Travis had said early on, he has this thing, or back then, about blurting things out because he was impulsive. And he stated early on that the problem is we have to get rid of the other guy in the car. That's autonomous vehicles. That's what he was talking about. And what's that give them? The opportunity to eliminate the workforce and all these issues of labor rights violations and yada yada. So they were hoping to get this self-driving autonomy in place, get it done, flip the switch, labor problems, bye-bye, all gone. But it didn't work out in the time. That's why it's deter and delay as much as possible for them to buy time so that they can still pocket those billions of dollars for as many months as possible. And also, don't forget, their IPO release, that's significant because they have public investors' money.
Thank you. Do we have any questions out there? Do you have a microphone back there, or?
I don't think I need it, but, all right, thanks.
Yeah, so Edward, I agree with much of what you said in your presentation, and there are certainly issues of concern related to organizations like MWA and GWR, and we've been dealing with those and trying to organize an environment where there have been backroom deals made, we believe, between some of the major unions and Uber and Lyft. My concern, or I guess my question, is in your efforts in advocating for AB 5, if the goal is ultimately not collective bargaining, how do you see workers being able to exercise power when, as many people have pointed out, the limits of employee status, right? Even though you get the federal labor protections, state level labor protections, if you don't have a voice to say, we're going to keep hours the way that we want them, we want to be monitored in ways that we agree to through collective bargaining, what's the mechanism to keep Uber and Lyft in check in an environment where drivers are employees but don't have a real union?
Well, there's room for many different levels of attacking this issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So there are room for collaboration with organized labor and other groups, because that's where you have the solidarity and the movement. Grassroots movements is powerful. Look at what we were able to achieve by setting up an action and then bringing in the IDG in New York City.
That's 1,000, 1,500 plus drivers. They shut down the Brooklyn Bridge, FDR. Did we ask them to do that? No, we did. We said slow roll. That's 5 miles less than the posted speed limit. But drivers will be drivers, and they do what they do. So, do we have the answers for all of this? No, we don't. But together, we could find the solutions by having the dialogue and not putting up walls and being sectoral and regional and trying to say that this is our market and that's your market and don't cross over. I mean, that's what organized labor has done. East Coast machinists, West Coast Teamsters, SCIU. What's that all about? No, the folks are being divided and conquered then. And we shouldn't give away our powers for this to happen. The grassroots movement, the new alternative labor movement is the answer. In solidarity, we get the attention of the media. You get the attention of the media through workers' actions, and they're folks that are politicians, that are regulators, they're compelled to take action. We've gotten results. It's already been demonstrated. Even, as you know, the May 8th action, that got attention. Our action that we did prior to that in 2016 got major attention. And so that's how we have to keep building upon for a whole global push, because that's where Uber is. It's on a global level. Otherwise, you're way behind the curve and you're just putting out fires. And we can't do that. We have to go straight to the core problems.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but is there anybody that has a question? Well, with that, Edward, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here. For those of you who stuck around this long, we do greatly appreciate it. And one last time, Abdul, spectacular job as the host and the host city. I think everybody would echo those comments. So thank you very much.
Yeah, let's do it, because the more communication we have, I mean, these are great conferences, don't get me wrong, but, you know, once a year, but there's a lot of things going on, and this has to be addressed, and yes,
We do have working.
yeah, look me in, and, right.
All right, that'll work.
Yeah, let me get a picture with you too.
Sure. They have been taking photos, but since we're so late.
Yeah, we're.
You want to do it here in front of us?
Oh man.